Dead ends don't announce themselves. That's what makes them fatal. One moment you're walking through what looks like a perfectly ordinary hallway, and then there's a wall, and by the time you realize it, the door behind you is already closing. Hazel Oakes had spent 28 years learning to spot the door before it shut. She'd grown up watching her mother miss every single one of them. Tonight, she had missed one herself. The server room on the 14th floor of Meridian Consulting smelled like dust and recycled air and the specific quiet dread of a place that held too many secrets. Hazel was sitting on the floor with her back against a rack of humming hard drives, her knees pulled to her chest, her cardigan doing absolutely nothing against the cold. The fluorescent overhead had a slow blink to it, on and off every 12 seconds, casting the room in brief, stuttering shadow. Outside the locked door, she could hear them talking. She hadn't recognized the voices at first. It was just after 10, and she'd been the only one left in the office. The way she usually was on Thursday nights when the billing cycle closed and the numbers didn't match, and nobody else cared enough to stay and figure out why. She'd been at her desk with a cold cup of coffee and 6 open spreadsheets when the elevator dinged. Then the lights in the main office went out. She'd thought power outage. She'd thought building maintenance. She'd thought a lot of things that were not 2 men in the stairwell talking about her by name in a way that made her understand she needed to stop thinking and start moving. Oakes has been filing amended audit reports for 3 months, one of them said, his voice carrying through the thin gap of the stairwell door she'd been foolish enough to crack open. She found the Harmon Street routing on her own. She doesn't know what it means yet, but she will. Tarrant, no. Not yet, and he won't. This gets cleaned up tonight, Bram handles it, and it stays quiet. She hadn't waited to hear the rest. She'd grabbed her laptop and moved. The server room was the only door on 14 with a keypad lock. She'd memorized the code the first week on the job, the way she memorized every code, every pin, every combination she came across, because information was the only thing that had ever been free to her, and she had never once taken it for granted. She pressed her back against the cold metal rack and opened her phone. 1 bar, maybe 1 bar and a half if she held it at a specific angle. The main office was silent except for the low thrum of whatever was happening outside that door. She opened her contacts. She had her sister in Lexington. She had the building's front desk, closed since 6. She had a cab company and a pizza place and her dentist. And she had the number she'd found an hour ago. It wasn't saved under a name. It had been embedded in a document buried inside a subfolder, inside another subfolder in the Harmon Street account. A file she had every right to be in, technically, because she'd been assigned the Harmon Street audit as her first solo project 6 weeks ago. The number was listed as Senior Client Contact, direct line with no other identification. She'd written it down on her notepad because that's what she did with anomalies. She wrote them down. She'd transferred it to her phone out of habit. She stared at it now. There were things she knew and things she didn't. She didn't know who the number belonged to. She didn't know the full shape of what she'd stumbled into. She knew that the Harmon Street account's books didn't add up, and that someone had worked very hard to make them look like they did, and that she had apparently gotten close enough to the truth that 2 men were now standing 30 feet away making decisions about her in the dark. She pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. It rang 4 times. She thought it was going to voicemail. She was already thinking about what she'd say, how she'd explain, whether any of this would make sense to a stranger who owed her nothing. Yes, the voice was low, unhurried, entirely accustomed to being answered and never to answering. Hazel's throat closed. Across the city, in the mezzanine bar of the Ashworth Hotel, Stellan Tarrant set his glass down on the railing. Below him, 400 people in formal wear were congratulating each other on charitable donations that hadn't cost any of them a single night's sleep. He was there because one of the city aldermen needed to see him in a room full of cameras, and Tarrant provided whatever city alderman needed so that they would continue to provide what he needed in return. It was a clean transaction. He understood clean transactions. He had not expected a call on this line. Only 2 people had this number. One of them was standing 8 feet away. The other was not the woman breathing in short, controlled increments on the other end of the phone. "Hello." He moved away from the railing, voice dropping. "Who is this?" "I found your number in a file." Her voice was barely above a whisper, measured, precise, terrified and working very hard not to sound it. "The Harmon Street account. I'm an auditor at Meridian. There are 2 men outside the door and they said something about cleaning this up tonight and I don't." She stopped. Something outside the door had moved. Tarrant was already stepping away from the bar, one hand raised to signal his driver. "Where are you?" he said. 14th floor, server room. I locked the door, but it's just a keypad, it's not." "How long has the lock been engaged?" A pause. 20 minutes, maybe 25. "Is the door reinforced?" "It's metal, I think. I don't know." Then quieter. "How does that help me?" "A standard keypad entry takes 90 seconds to bypass without the code. Less if they have tools." He was moving through the hotel now, jacket buttoned, expression the same as it always was in a room full of people watching him, completely unreadable. They haven't come through the door yet, which means they don't have the code and they're deciding whether to get tools or wait you out. Either way, you have time. Time for what? For me to get there. Silence on the line. "You don't know me," Hazel said. "No," Tarrant said, "but you found a number you were never supposed to find, which means you're either very good at your job or very unlucky, and either way I need to speak with you before anyone else does." He pushed through the hotel's side exit into the cold. "Get into the back corner of the room. Low. Stay on the line." He lowered the phone and turned to the man who had been standing at his shoulder for 6 years. "Hector," Tarrant said quietly, "tell me everything you know about a junior auditor at Meridian named Oakes." Hector's face did something complicated. "Now," Tarrant said, not louder, just final. "The Harmon Street account," Hector explained as they moved through the garage, "was one of 12 clean fronts Tarrant ran through Meridian. Standard arrangement. The firm's managing partner knew the shape of it. The junior staff didn't need to. For 3 years, the books had been invisible. Then a routine internal shuffle had assigned the account's audit to a new hire. Oakes H., a transfer from a regional firm in Kentucky, impeccable with numbers, had apparently never billed a single hour she hadn't earned. "She started filing amended reports immediately," Hector said, "nothing that exposed the whole structure. But she kept finding the inconsistencies. Bram flagged it to me 3 weeks ago. I told him to hold." Tarrant looked at him. "He didn't hold," Hector said. The SUV pulled up. Tarrant was already getting in. "Bram acted without my authorization," Tarrant said. Hector said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The drive took 11 minutes. Tarrant kept the line open the entire time, the phone resting on the leather seat beside him, Hazel's quiet breathing audible underneath the city noise. She didn't speak. He didn't need her to. The steadiness of her breathing told him what he needed to know. She hadn't broken, hadn't spiraled, was keeping herself together in a locked room in the dark with every reason to fall apart. He found himself listening to it more than he meant to. 2 minutes out, he said. "Okay," steady voice controlled, but underneath it, a very small tremor she was working hard to suppress. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Has anything happened at the door in the last 10 minutes?" A pause. "They knocked about 7 minutes ago," said maintenance. Another pause. "I didn't answer." "Good. They're still out there. I can hear them moving." 2 minutes, he said. "Do not move." He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairwell to 14. The main office was dark except for the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 men were standing outside the server room door. He recognized them both. He had known one of them since the man was 19 years old. "Mr. Tarrant." The taller one straightened instantly. "We had a situation developing with the—" "I know what you had," Tarrant said. He didn't raise his voice. The temperature in the room seemed to drop anyway. Step away from the door. They stepped away from the door. He walked to the keypad, entered the code, and pushed the door open. She was in the back corner, exactly where he'd told her. Sitting on the floor between two server racks, laptop pressed flat against her knees, chin up. Her expression was composed in the way of someone who had been composing it for a while. Dark hair, glasses slightly skewed from pressing her head against the rack, a grey cardigan with a small ink stain on the cuff. She was shaking. She was also clearly determined not to show it. When she saw him, she didn't run forward. She stood up slowly, one hand on the rack for balance, and looked at him with the particular focus of someone trying to assess a situation they don't have enough information for yet. "You're the client," she said. "Stellan Tarrant." Yes. Something moved behind her eyes. She was putting it together. She was fast. He could already see that, and none of it was landing softly. "The Harmon Street account is yours," she said. "Yes. And those men outside were supposed to." "Not with my authorization," he said. "They acted alone." She looked at him for a long moment. She glanced past his shoulder at the hallway, where the two men stood under Hector's attention. Then she looked back at Tarrant. "I'm going to assume," Hazel said carefully, "that I shouldn't call the police. That would be a reasonable assumption. And I'm also going to assume that you coming to get me isn't entirely altruistic." He looked at her. "No," he said, "it isn't." She nodded once, as if this confirmed something she'd already calculated. "What do you want?" Presently, Tarrant said, "To get you out of this building. After that, a conversation. About the Harmon Street account. About what you found, and how long before your supervisors find out you found it." Another pause. She was thinking. He could see her working through it. The angles, the variables, the version of this that had the best outcome for her. She wasn't panicking. She was auditing, processing the data in front of her and looking for the figure that balanced. "My amended reports go to review Monday," she said. "If whoever reads them knows what they're looking at, they'll know what I found." "Do they know what they're looking at?" "The managing partner does." She met his eyes. "He's been in that account for 3 years, Mr. Tarrant. He knows exactly what he's looking at." Tarrant didn't move, but something in the stillness of him changed. She had just told him something his own people hadn't. He extended his hand, palm an offer. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She was calculating something he couldn't read, which was an unusual experience for him. Then she picked up her laptop, tucked it under her arm, and walked past his hand toward the door on her own. "I can walk," she said. The SUV was warm. She sat behind the driver with the laptop still on her knees, watching the city move past tinted glass. He sat on the other side of the car and said nothing. She appreciated the silence. The shaking had mostly stopped by the time they crossed the bridge. She pressed her fingers flat on the case until her hands steadied. "What's going to happen to them?" she asked. "The 2 men." "That's being handled." "By handled you mean?" "Nothing you need to account for in your reports." She looked at him. He was watching out his own window, profile sharp against passing streetlights. He had a scar along his jawline, old, thin, well-healed. His hands were completely still. Everything about him was still, in the way that felt less like calm and more like something kept deliberately contained. "You're going to have someone go through my desk," Hazel said. "Likely. And my files." "Yes. And then you'll want me to explain everything I found, and everything I guessed, and everything I was about to figure out," she said, "so you know how exposed you are." He turned from the window. He looked at her directly for the first time since the server room, and she made herself hold it. "Yes," he said, "that is what I'm going to want." "And in exchange," she said, "what do I get?" A silence. "You're negotiating with me," he said. "I have a laptop full of amended audit reports and 3 months of work pointing directly at your financial structure, Mr. Tarrant. I'm not in a position to go back to my desk Monday morning and pretend I never found it." She kept her voice level. Her hands were steady now. So yes, I'm negotiating. He was quiet for so long she thought she'd miscalculated. Then the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. What do you want? He said. What Hazel wanted was a salary that matched what she actually produced, and for nobody to send men to deal with her in the dark ever again. What she said was, I want to know what I actually found, the full picture, not the version you decide I'm allowed to have, the real one. Why? Because I've been looking at incomplete numbers for 6 weeks, she said, and I don't do well with incomplete numbers. He looked at her for a long moment. The city lights moved across his face. You'll stay at the penthouse tonight, he said. Your apartment address, Bram has it. The implication landed. Oh, she said. It isn't a request, he said. It's a security measure. Everything is a transaction with you, she said. Everything is a transaction with everyone, he said. Most people just don't say it out loud. The penthouse was not what she expected, which was saying something because she'd already adjusted her expectations considerably. It was large and stark and cold in the way of spaces designed to be impressive rather than inhabited. Expensive furniture, no photographs anywhere, a professional espresso machine in the kitchen, with absolutely no food around it. He showed her the guest room, towels in the cabinet, Wi-Fi if she needed to work. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked not uncertain exactly, but present, as if something about the space was making him aware of it in a way he wasn't usually. Mr. Tarrant. He stopped. She was still holding her laptop. The managing partner, if he runs before you get to him, he has access to a secondary set of books. I don't think your people know about. I found a reference in a backup file. Just a naming convention I recognized, but if you want to know where to look. He turned back fully. I do, he said. Then tomorrow morning, she said, we have that conversation. Full picture, real numbers. She went into the guest room and shut the door. She slept 3 hours. She woke to the sound of voices, low, controlled, the specific register of people delivering information to someone who doesn't react. She opened the door. The kitchen island had been transformed. 3 men she didn't recognize stood around a city map spread across the granite. Tarrant was at the head of it, still in last night's clothes, jacket gone, sleeves pushed up. The ink on his forearms surprised her. She hadn't expected it, though she couldn't have said why. He looked up when she appeared. The 3 men looked at her with varying degrees of suspicion. She looked at the map. She looked at the faces. She walked to the espresso machine. Nobody said anything. She made a shot. The machine was more intuitive than it looked. She drank it standing at the counter. The secondary books, she said, not looking up from her cup. The naming convention I recognized came from a regional routing system my old firm used in Kentucky. It's not standard up here. If whoever built it learned that system in the Southeast, you're looking for a financial consultant with roots in Georgia, Tennessee, or Kentucky. She set her cup down. That narrows the managing partner's network considerably. Silence. One of the men, thick-necked, a scar visible above his collar, said, "How does she?" "She found it," Tarrant said, "in 3 months, on her own." He looked at Hazel with an expression she couldn't fully decode. The people who built it had 3 years. She poured a second shot. "Do you want me to narrow it further?" She spent the next 4 days at the dining table with 3 monitors, untangling 6 years of deliberately constructed financial obfuscation with the same methodical patience she'd applied to every disorganized set of records she'd ever encountered. Numbers were numbers. They had to balance. The skills required for cleaning up a regional firm's billing chaos weren't categorically different from mapping the financial infrastructure of a criminal syndicate. On the 3rd day, she found something nobody had asked her to find. The Harmon Street account wasn't the only one they were skimming, she said, spinning her chair to face Tarrant, where he stood at the window. The managing partner and Bram have been diverting a percentage to a 3rd account for 18 months. small enough that it looks like rounding in each individual transaction. Across all 12 accounts, it adds up to $4.7 million. Tarrant did not move from the window. "How long did it take you to find that?" he asked. "About 6 hours," she said. "It would have taken your accountant 6 weeks. They'd have started with the wrong assumption, looking for the big moves. This was a small moves operation." Patient. A pause. Patient people are harder to catch. He turned from the window. He looked at her in the way she'd noticed him looking at things he was genuinely trying to understand. "You're not afraid of this," he said. She thought about it honestly. "I'm afraid of a lot of things," she said. "I'm not afraid of numbers. And numbers are mostly what you're made of, from where I'm sitting." Something crossed his face that she'd started to identify, over 4 days, as the version of a reaction he'd edited down to its smallest possible expression. "My apartment is gone," she said, not a question. She'd figured it out on day 2. "Yes. I assumed. I'll replace." "I don't want you to replace it." She turned back to her screens. "I want to finish what I'm doing. The account structure has gaps, 3 shell layers I haven't mapped yet. If you want them clean before the end of the week." "Hazel." She stopped. He never used her first name. 3 days in, she'd started to think he didn't know it. He was standing close enough now that she had to look up slightly. The scar along his jaw was more visible at this distance. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and she had the specific sensation of being fully, uncomplicatedly seen, which was not a sensation she was accustomed to. "My people underestimated you for 3 months," he said. "I'm not going to make the same error." "I'd appreciate that," she said. "What you can see in those accounts, that's a skill I've paid significant money to people who don't have it." He held her gaze. "I want it inside this organization, legitimately structured, properly compensated." Define legitimately. An actual title, an actual contract, nothing that requires you to lie on paper. And in exchange? "You stay." It was a simple word. She turned it over the way she turned over numbers that seemed too clean, looking for the place where it didn't add up. She found no obvious trap. She found something else instead. Something about the way he'd said it, stripped of the usual layering of transaction, that landed differently than she expected. "I'll need to see the full books," she said. "All of them, every account." Yes. And autonomy. "I don't work well with someone looking over my shoulder telling me what to find. I'm aware of that. And if I find something that concerns me—" "You bring it to me directly," he said. "To me." She looked at him for a moment more. Then she turned back to her screens. "I'll have the 3 shells mapped by morning," she said. 7 months later, the city had largely forgotten the managing partner's name. He'd been replaced first by a federal investigation into his personal finances, precipitated by an anonymous tip and a remarkably organized file of evidence, and then by a restructured board that didn't know enough to ask the right questions. The Meridian accounts were cleaner than they had ever been, which was only notable if you knew what clean actually cost. It was a Tuesday. Hazel had been in the office since 7. She was wearing a jacket she'd bought herself, dark grey, fitted well, the kind she'd always admired in windows without looking at the price tag. She hadn't looked at the price tag this time either. She was reviewing a contract for a freight company acquisition when Tarrant came in at 9 with 2 coffees from the place on the corner. He'd learned how she took hers in month 2 and had never asked again. She didn't look up. The freight company has a customs problem on their Vancouver routes. Nothing that can't be restructured, but the valuation needs to come down 11% before I'll sign off. I told them 11.5, he said. She looked up, split the difference. He looked at her. He had been looking at her differently for some time now, and she had pretended not to notice until pretending became impossible. She found she didn't want to pretend anymore. "The acquisitions board is in the conference room in 20 minutes, she said. "I know. I have 3 concerns about the Langley portfolio I want to raise before anyone commits to anything." "I know that too," So you should probably let me finish this. Hazel. She stopped. He came around the desk. He didn't rush it. He never rushed anything. He stopped close enough that she'd have to make a choice about the distance between them. She didn't move back. You understand this is not uncomplicated, she said. Most things worth understanding aren't, he said. And you're going to make it very difficult for me to maintain professional objectivity when I'm reviewing your accounts. I've considered that problem. And you've never let complexity stop you from finding the number that actually matters, he said. I don't expect that to change. She looked at him for a moment more. Then she stood up, picked up her coffee and said, 20 minutes. Don't be late. She walked to the conference room ahead of him, heels steady on the marble, the city spread out through the windows 20 floors below. All of it sharp and clear and knowable if you knew how to look. She knew how to look. The girl who'd eaten lunch alone for years, but who'd stayed late every Thursday because the numbers needed to balance, and nobody else cared enough to do it, who'd grown up watching every door close a half-second too soon. That girl had learned something it took Hazel a long time to put into words. The door doesn't close on you if you understand the mechanism. She understood the mechanism now. When Tarrant followed her into the room and the board looked up, and she was already standing at the head of the table with the portfolio open and her 3 concerns laid out in order of financial severity, she saw in his face something that had no transactional equivalent at all. She let herself look at it for exactly 1 moment. Then she turned to the board. Let's begin, she said.